Okay, well, thank you, Sydney, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I think it's the afternoon for most of you. I'm Susan Gibbs, and I'm the president of the SS United States Conservancy, and I just want to, this is a special members-only event, and I just want to thank you all so much for supporting the Conservancy, supporting our work. We are just so profoundly grateful to all of you. And it's really because of all of you that the ship remains afloat. She's overcome such extraordinary odds. And not only is she safely afloat, but plans are continuing to advance for her revitalization. We remain in our agreement with RXR Realty, and they continue to examine options for the ship's commercial activation within a post-COVID economy. And as you can imagine, this is a very complex undertaking. RXR shares the Conservancy's long-term vision of an extraordinary shipboard museum on the vessel. But in the short term, we are joining the rest of the world in taking advantage of the fact that we are all connected on our computer screens and our phone screens. We're so excited to be sharing a program on the first of what will be a series of digital exhibitions. And these exhibitions will offer a sneak peek into the Conservancy's extraordinary collections and are enabling us to share our curatorial content in new and exciting ways. As you all know, this first exhibition is Advertising the United States, Discovering America's Flagship Through Prints, Posters, and Advertisements. And it explores how depictions of the historic ocean liner from her debut in 1952 to her withdrawal from service in 1969 have shaped our understanding, experience, and memories of this iconic American symbol, as well as her namesake nation. And I have to say, this exhibition would absolutely not have been possible without the extraordinary ability, creativity, what other superlatives can I come with, of our curator, Sydney Sheehan, who I'm so thrilled to introduce now. Sydney joined the Conservancy, gosh, I've lost track of time. It seems like she's been with us forever, but actually I think it was just last year. So Sydney came to us after earning her master's degree in American art of the 19th century from Columbia University. And her thesis was fascinating, a focus on Native American mastheads on naval and trade ships throughout the United States in the mid-19th century. She's held previous positions with the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Whitney Museum of American Art, among others. She's also the Technology and Outreach Chair of the Coalitions of Masters Scholars on Material Culture. And so I'm going to turn it over to Sydney, who will give us an overview of the exhibition. And then we will introduce our panelists, and then finally at the end, go into Q&A. So Sydney, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Susan. I'm just going to go ahead and try and share my screen here. But as I do, I also just want to point everyone to the bottom of your screen. You'll see that there's a Q&A section there. If you have any questions for us during our, chatting and everything like that, you can go ahead and throw them in there. And as we receive them, we will sort of shout them out and answer what we can. So essentially what I wanted to talk a bit about, aside from, the exhibition itself, is how we got here, how we actually decided to go through with something like this. And I think that we're all in this point where we've, been living in a digital world for quite some time because of COVID. And while things have been on a downturn, particularly for cultural institutions and museums, I think there's also a wonderful sort of opportunity for museums and institutions to access larger audiences through digital exhibitions. And as we're sort of navigating this digital world together, we're realizing these are really great ways to continue having conversations that we want to have, show off objects and collections and things like that. So it was definitely something that we thought, we should jump at the opportunity. And it's important for the Conservancy to engage larger audiences as well. Obviously, we have a wonderful group of supporters and those who have traveled aboard the ship or who have intense connections with the SS United States, but there's also so many other people out there who in my opinion, would benefit from knowing more about the SS United States, understanding the connection to our nation's history and to, you know, the memories that this ship has created in people. And so that was really on my mind when I was thinking about what sort of can we produce to engage a larger audience. And then also, obviously, the question of what actually looks good online. Obviously, you know, a digital exhibition, it is a website. We can't ignore the fact that it is going to be on a screen. So how do we sort of navigate that and engage people in that way? So the sort of way that I was thinking about it was actually through the lens of the Unrushables. I stumbled upon them as I was perusing our collection, and I was so fascinated by this advertising campaign because it seemed to me like it was just something straight out of James Bond. You have these very cool looking women and these dapper gentlemen, and you have these great slogans like the Unrushables or whatever happened to Serenity. And I just thought this was a great visual campaign, and I wanted to know more about, you know, why were we putting the ship in this type of narrative? And as I was digging into it, there was just so much to uncover. So, and I, you know, obviously these two-dimensional advertisements are great on the screen as well. They're nice and crisp and clear. And there's a lot to engage with in these types of advertisements. So I sort of started with the Unrushables, and I thought, how can we expand this to think about the narrative of the SS United States, but also dig deeper into the narrative of the United States as a country? And that is sort of how I got to just the idea of the advertisement. You know, it's the public image of something, but it's also a constructed image. It's very much how something is created to make it the most marketable for its public, for its consumers. And once I started there, it was really so exciting to go through the hundreds of advertisements that there are. And I wish that we could have had room for all of them, but unfortunately, you would have been clicking through an exhibition for a couple of days if that was the case. So some things that I looked for aside from, you know, just is it an advertisement of the SS United States, were first and foremost visuals. So with the Unrushables, you're seeing these fantastic mid-century modern women, and there's colors, and the colors are reflective of the colors of the ship and also the colors of the nation. And it's this really wonderful cycle. But they're also, you know, saying something beyond just the text. We can read into the images, and we can really begin to understand a little bit more about the society that these ads were created in. Something else that I was thinking about is representation. So who is shown? Who are we seeing and who are we not seeing? That was a particularly important question for me going into the exhibition because, you know, with advertisements, it does construct a public narrative, and it's very easy to see it and believe that that is the narrative, but it is constructed. So we have to be critical about it. So who is being represented? And how does this actually fit into the larger narrative of the SS United States? How can we tell the story of this amazing ship through these types of advertisements and images and slogans and catchy phrases and things like that? So I divided the exhibition into 3 parts. The first is just advertising the United States, starting off from, you know, the very beginning of how the public narrative around the ship was created and sort of cemented into people's minds. The second is the United States as stage, thinking about the ship as a set for marketing other goods, but also marketing the nation. How are we presenting ourselves internationally? How are we presenting ourselves to our own people? And how are we sort of thinking through narratives of masculinity, of femininity on this grandiose vehicle, and things like that. And so the final one is Sailing in the Age of the Jet, which features the Unrushables. And might have been my favorite part of the exhibition to sort of go through, because we're seeing this really great change in the way that the advertisements are constructed because they're competing with jetliners. So the first section of the exhibition is Advertising the United States. And it really starts off with a discussion of the ad age, of what about the 50s and 60s made it so interesting to look at ads. You know, suddenly we start thinking about psychology, we start thinking about our consumer audience, but then also who is the consumer audience? You have women who now have this purchasing power because they were pulled into the workforce during World War II. And you have a shift in dynamics. You have a growing middle class. What does that mean for how things are advertised? And how does that sort of cycle into this new identity? We also talk about tourism and a new economy in this section. So one of the coolest things that I sort of discovered as I went through this exhibition and did my research is that tourism was marketed as a patriotic duty. Suddenly after World War II, where everyone was, you know, compelled to save their money, to ration their food, suddenly everyone was like, spend your money, go places. And it was for two reasons. The first being, you know, it stimulates the economy. If you spend, people make. If people make, you spend. It's this great cycle. But then also, if you're traveling abroad, suddenly you're being able to showcase this Americanness in other countries. You're being able to say, well, look at me, I'm an American, I can spend the money that I saved. And it's this much bigger narrative, internationally speaking. And then finally, we sort of proposed that the United States, the SS United States, was actually an extension of the American dream. It was called the American dream. In ads like this, it was, you know, why settle for anything less than a Star-Spangled Crossing? You were literally taking America with you when you were going to Europe, and what's better than that? So the second, oh, and then this is actually one of my favorite ads. Who built the United States? I think this is one of the most poignant ads that I've ever seen. And I think it's very like relevant today because it asks this question, and is it asking a question about the ship, or is it asking a question about the country, and what are the implications of that? And I think that it was very ahead of its time in the way that it was created, but I also love the visuals. It very much reminds me of Thomas Hart Benton, who's one of my favorite artists. And it's just this really, really interesting sort of like very in your face question. And it would have been very interesting to see, you know, in a magazine in its time. But I just thought this was one of those really poignant moments of, you know, what does it mean to have a ship that's called the United States that travels back and forth, and it brings with it a notion of Americanness. And what does that Americanness mean? What is the definition of that? So we tried to explore that a little bit in the United States as stage, where we thought about the ship as a set for commercial advertisement, but also how that implicated the people that bought products and that engaged with these products. So here you see the man in command, and you see this very imposing, you know, very masculine man who's the chief officer. And it's just, it really says something about the product. It tells you that if you're buying Esquire shoe polish, you can be just as precise, poised, and polished as Chief Officer Richard Wrightington. And it's just such an interesting way to use ideas of masculinity, but also perpetuate them and really create a little bit more of a nuanced narrative surrounding what does it mean to be an American man and who does that apply to? And then, of course, the ship also was using, or, you know, there was also notions of femininity associated with the SS United States. And you have this great, which I think is just a very funny, like random cutout floating in the center of the room. And this woman coming in the latest Paris fashions. Her daughter is dressed like Madeline. And then you can assume that it's her husband behind her carrying all the packages. And, you know, suddenly you have this notion of luxury, of real opulence associated with the SS United States. If you travel on board the SS United States, then you're the type of person that wants to buy Lee's carpets, because those two people who engage with these products, they're the epitome of elegance. And it's just so interesting to see. And one of my favorite things is to see it sort of compared to one another, is the different body languages of the men in the photo, which in the images, I think is really, really funny and interesting. I just think it's such a fun comparison of this like real masculinity, and then this very feminine sort of like, I'm willing to do whatever, you know, it takes to be the epitome of elegance. But in some ways it's the same thing. You're still focusing on these two individuals, the woman in pink and the man in white, and what they represent to you and why you would want to be like them. And one of those reasons is because they're associated with the SS United States. And finally, in our sort of third section of the exhibition, we talk about sailing in the age of the jet. So obviously with the creation of the jet engine and passenger airlines becoming more popular, it wasn't as exciting to travel to Europe, you know, in 5 days when you could do it in 5 hours. So now the SS United States wasn't just a way to get there. It was no longer the fastest way to Europe, but it was the boat to be on. You know, if you knew what elegance was, if you knew what luxury was, you would be on the SS United States. And it was like a vacation before your vacation. And this is sort of where the Unrushables were born. They are put forth as this type of person who, you know, they choose the unhurried life, the champagne life. They choose to indulge themselves in this elegant way of crossing because they can. And one of the most interesting things that I had seen or had thought about is, you know, who is an unrushable? So like, who are we seeing in these images? And obviously you have characters like in this one, you see Otto Bismarck, which was the head chef on the SS United States, but we're also seeing mostly upper middle class people, people who have the time to take the ship rather than a plane, people who have the money, who can spend it on themselves rather than on something else. And, you know, this was a really interesting part for me to sort of dive a little bit deeper in what does it mean to be able to call yourself an unrushable? There's one of the unrushable ads says, you know, it could be from an undergrad to a state senator. And while that seems like a really big range, it does leave out people who couldn't afford to go to college or who couldn't make it to college or people who weren't in this, you know, white collar job industry. And I think it's very interesting to just have seen the evolution from being, you know, the American dream. And I think it always was an epitome of the American dream, but really ending in this very cool mid-century modern, like straight out of James Bond, especially that man at the bottom with his tux on, just completely elegant way of crossing. And what did that mean for the people who could do it? What did that mean for the people who could engage with the SS United States, but also what did that mean for those who couldn't? One of my biggest questions sort of surrounding this exhibition was, you know, how did people who may not have crossed on the SS United States, how did they envision it? And what did these ads sort of tell them about their station, about their position as United States citizens? And just all these things that we can sort of read into these ads that aren't apparent on first glance. And so just some of my key takeaways were really thinking about society at large and how we can use these advertisements to learn a bit more about what was going on at the time. But more so, how do we use that knowledge productively, especially today? We're living in an age when we sometimes can't even tell what's an advertisement and what's not. And how do we use something like this, where we see a very, very straightforward constructed narrative, and how do we complicate it so that we can then move on and continue being critical with the world around us? And then another takeaway is just thinking about representation. Obviously, you know, in all of these ads, there are no people of color represented. There's, you know, women are put into positions of either being, you know, wanting to be elegant or being, you know, the wife. And so it's just this interesting space where you can really complicate these narratives that have been put forth and try and go from there in constructing how do we have conversations around the different experiences, the different memories we might have with the SS United States, and how that sort of blooms out to be seeping out into our understanding of just Americanness in general. And I will pass it off now to Paul with some discussion about his ad that he so generously contributed, which is this one, the Popular Mechanics one.
Hello, yeah, I'm Paul, and I actually have a copy of this Popular Mechanics. I actually came in 5 issues about this model. And as a kid, magazines quickly started to rival comic books for me because of the illustrations. In the 40s, 50s, 60s, illustration was still the more popular way of advertising or doing book covers, magazine covers, which just lent something more to the imagination than photographs. It was something a little bit more perfect, a little bit more ideal. It would focus on what it wanted to focus on, and then the rest would kind of just let your imagination fill in the gaps as to what this is all about. And like with comic books, you get these visuals that grab your attention, and from there it's up to you. And magazines, like I said, from the time I was a kid, I mean, I was cutting out ads, making files. I mean, I still have a file cabinet, buried with ads, covers. As soon as I knew a magazine wasn't going to be missed, and sometimes I even overreached and took them prematurely, only to hear my name screamed out as to, where's the rest of this article? And I would have it. It would be on the back of an ad, for Pontiac or ships or TWA. Yeah, this Popular Mechanics is one of many, and I had the SS United States, coming towards the reader. It was looking at you. Yet I can picture myself as the little boy, but my father and my grandfather, wanting to lend a hand and me putting together the model. But this magazine eluded me for the longest time. My aunt actually gave it to me later on. She found it at because she knew I was familiar with this particular Popular Mechanics, but I never could get one of my own. And she was at a garage sale, thrift, flea market or something somewhere, and she surprised it with me a couple of years later, and just knowing that I was obsessed with it, and thus and ships. I growing up in New York. Of course, cars and subways, trains were around me, and they were my fascination. But we also had the waterfront, and my family was still traveling to and from Europe by ship. So we would all get all dressed up one day to go down to the waterfront. Somebody was either coming in or somebody was going out, and you get to go on board, and it was a party. It felt good. You're on a ship. Everyone's dressed up. Everyone's having a good time, and you'd be in a place that would just kind of blow your mind. On it wasn't a place you'd see every day, but things were larger than life, and that back then you had the freedom of kind of strolling around and enjoying the ship. But all these magazines, covers, and the advertisements was a way for me to kind of hold on to it and keep it in my house, keep it at my fingertips, because all machines always had something of a human. I personified everything. Every machine had a personality. Walking down the street, cars were either sad, mad, angry. Certain ships were more aggressive, more elegant, and of course the SS United States had the reputation of being so fast that whether William Francis Gibbs really knocked it out of the park with making it look like it was moving even when it was standing still, but its reputation also made you think speed, because everybody, when we're going to come to the SS United States, that was the number one word that I always heard associated with more than elegant, more than I don't know, but what they call the other ships, but with speed. My grandfather who always sailed the Italian lines, finally, when the SS United States was put into service, made sure his next trip back to Europe was aboard the SS United States. And when you're growing up, the adults around you also kind of help shape what you think about the world that's out there, that's going to be available to you when it's your turn. In the meantime, I was collecting magazines and making drawings and having my own fantasies of, what car I would drive, what ship I would sail, what airplane. And And even when the airlines were becoming more and more popular, there was a lot of buzz about aircrafts, and the Boeing 747 came out, and it was very exciting. But I didn't put the two and two together. I never saw the competition until the trips to the bon voyage party started to fade away, and the piers were empty more than they were full. And by the time I was old enough to realize that they were gone. So then all the files and the pictures I kept were even more important. It was my way of holding on to it. And then full circle, the SS United States, she manages to hold on and stick around until the internet comes, and I find that she's just over in Philadelphia, and there was this great group already involved with trying to make sure she sticks around and repurpose her. And I've, excuse the pun, been on board ever since.
That's fantastic, Paul. And before we turn it to Marc, I just wanted to quickly introduce our panelists, because we're just so grateful to the three of you. And Paul's already shared his lifelong passion for New York and historic preservation, but I just wanted to call out that he's the co-chair of the Conservancy's New York chapter, which has done amazing and varied work over the years, keeping the flag flying high for the ship's hoped for return back to the Big Apple. And also Paul is just an incredibly talented artist and illustrator, and has a number of clients and has a whole career doing that. But he also, has rendered the SS United States in various creative ways that we enjoy sharing, and that have just really added so much to how the ship is depicted and indoors now. So thank you so much, Paul, for everything you have done and continue to do. And then the other two, I can just say we have two Marcs who are rounding out the panel here. And so Marc Perry is, and actually the one criteria that we had for this entire panel is that everyone had to be fully obsessed with the SS United States. So fortunately we pulled that off. So Marc Perry is a founding board member of the Conservancy. And yes, as he has said, when he first started getting involved in this effort, his hair was chestnut gray. But yeah, in addition to his work with the Conservancy, he is an Emmy and Golden Globe award-winning television writer and producer who has this long string of credits, probably shows that many of us have been watching reruns of as we're stuck in quarantine this past year. He's been an ocean liner fan since childhood and a memorabilia collector. And one extraordinary contribution Marc made back in, well, we won't even say the year, but he and director Robert Radler produced the award-winning and critically acclaimed documentary with the SS United States Lady in Waiting, which is an extraordinary film that I assume most of you have seen, and if not, it is available for viewing, and it again has just so helped continue to tell the story of this ship. And lastly, we have Marc Shenfield, who is also a board member of the Conservancy and has a unique perspective or credential in that he is an actual ad man. He has had a 30-year career in advertising as an art director, copywriter, creative director, and he's won numerous awards for that work. And he also has a deep background in historic preservation and maritime history. He serves on the Preservation Advisory Committee of the Municipal Art Society in New York City, among many other leadership roles in preservation. And we are so honored to have Marc at the helm with us at the Conservancy. So again, thank all three of you for everything, for contributing to the exhibition, for sharing your insights today. And so now we will get back to the regularly scheduled programming. I believe it is, I think it's Marc Perry who's up next.
Thank you, Susan. And I just wanted to point out that my hair was chestnut brown when we got started. So, I contributed to this exhibit one of the unrushable posters, which, as you'll see there, I have 2 of them in my collection on the wall here behind me, both by the same artist. And I love the whole, like Sydney, I love the whole concept of the Unrushables, from the swinging 60s artwork that caters to a then contemporary audience, to the fashions and the almost kind of psychedelic sensibility. I also love that it includes this aerial view of the ship, almost as if seen longingly from a jet. And I was really happy to see that that particular image ended up on t-shirts that are being sold in the museum shop online as part of the exhibit. It's one of my favorite graphics of the ship. And on that blue background on the shirt, it's just absolutely stunning. I have ordered 2 of them. And the other thing about the concept of the Unrushables is, when you look at the story of the SS United States, having gone into service with all this hoopla in 1952, she served 17 years, and then she was kind of unceremoniously withdrawn from service in 1969. But she's still here. She has gone through a series of owners until finally the Conservancy has managed to acquire the ship. But that makes the SS United States herself the ultimate unrushable in my book, because we are taking our time as we work to bring the ship back to her glory, to repurpose for her and find a new life for her. So the theme of the Unrushables, yes, it resonated in the 60s when there was that transition from speed to, holiday from hurry. But I do like to think of the ship herself as the ultimate unrushable. Now, as a big collector of pretty much everything related to the SS United States, I have been accused of trying to reassemble the ship in my house. But I acquired this particular pair of posters from an auction many years ago at Swan Galleries in New York. And I was really drawn not just to the concept of the Unrushables, but to the graphics and the artwork and the colors and all of that, especially. Which really, really pop, especially when you see them in person. And I've always said that the SS United States may have been late to the transatlantic party, having debuted in 1952, but she was the belle of the ball. And she was marketed to a post-war crowd, touting her top assets at the time of safety, speed, style, and above all, speed. As we all know, she shattered the transatlantic speed record in both directions on her maiden voyage. And so she was rightfully marketed to the traveling public as the fastest way to and from all of Europe. Europe is only 5 gala dinner parties away. And it was all about getting there fast, fast, fast. And then along came the jets. And now a 5-day trip becomes a 5-hour trip. So the advertising had to adapt. And what was once sold as the fastest way was now hyped as take a holiday from hurry and sail with the Unrushables. And I also wanted to say that it's funny, Sydney, that you mentioned James Bond, because to me, I've always thought that the Unrushables would make a really good companion series to the old British TV show, The Avengers. I'm not talking about the Marvel franchise. I'm talking about the old TV show featuring Diana Rigg and Patrick Macnee as a pair of swinging 60s secret agents. And I think they could have very well gone undercover as the Unrushables. In fact, I may just pitch that to Netflix. But anyway, these are 2 of my favorite pieces in my collection, and I was thrilled to be able to contribute them, to one of them to the exhibition.
Thank you so much. And Marc Shenfield, I'm about to put up your piece that you contributed right now. So just give me 1 sec.
Okay, this ad is actually related very much to the Unrushables campaign. It was part of another companion campaign, I would call it, that also touted the benefits of traveling by ship rather than by jet. And I was attracted to it. Well, let me back up a second. I was always an ocean liner freak from the age of 5. So I was fortunate enough to actually be able to go on the SS United States as a visitor. I never traveled on it, but I went on board most of the great liners that were in service in New York in the late 60s as a visitor. And I have to say that the time that I went on board the Big U in 1968, it was one of the few products, and I'll say this from my advertising background, it was one of the few products or services that ever actually lived up to its advertising. It really was a superlative ship in every way. I mean, it was so far ahead of all the other ocean liners. It was one of the few really great post-war liners that came on stream after World War II. The others that had made it through the war were like dinosaurs compared to this. And it's interesting that even the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, he was the former king of Great Britain, abandoned the Queen Mary as soon as the SS United States came on board. The Windsors traveled on the United States exclusively from the minute it went into service. So that tells you something about the superlative qualities of this ship. It was really the epitome of 150 years of steamship evolution. It was just so much superior to anything that had come before it, mechanically and stylistically and everything else. That it's just astounding that the progress that was made from the dawn of the steamship era to the SS United States, where you could go almost 50 miles an hour at top speed, which ironically it never really did after its maiden voyage. It settled into a nice leisurely 4.5-day crossing, but it was still sold as the fastest ship in the world, which it was capable of being. But of course, it never actually ran that speed on a regular basis. So that, those are the liberties that advertising would take. But there's something else that I wanted to point out about all of these ads of this final, jet era. And that a tremendous amount of energy was put into trying to come up with novel ways to differentiate this ship and all the others from jets, because they were suddenly dinosaurs, essentially. And most people just simply didn't want to take them anymore because they took too long. I mean, a round trip on even the fastest ship in the world was almost 2 weeks out of your life. And it wasn't a cruise ship where there was an itinerary. You got to your destination and you were there, and it was off the ship and that was it. So it was transportation. And that spelled the doom of the liners, no matter how great the ads were. All of these fantastic ads ultimately did not prevail because the product just was no longer viable. So try as you will, all of these ads were futile. Cunard did them too. All the major steamship companies did them in one form or another, and they did not succeed. So there's a lesson there. But one final thing I'll mention, my whole collection, such as it was all taken from the time. I cut this ad out of a magazine in 1968, the year it ran, and while the ship was still running. And everything in my collection was stuff that I either cut out or went to a travel agent and picked the racks clean of deck plans and brochures, or lifted stuff off the ships too. Some ashtrays and menus and all this stuff. So everything I have has personal connection to it. I didn't buy anything. I never bought a single thing at an auction or anything. It's all stuff that came from back then. And the reason I mention this is because the ads and the other materials that were printed to promote the ship were actually, in my view, and I think I probably knew this then without knowing it, they were part and parcel of the ships. They weren't just ads that ran. These were things that were bought and paid for by the people who bought and paid for the ship itself. They were necessary for the operation of the ship, just like the dinnerware in China and the dinner menus and the signal flags that flew off the mast and the navigation equipment. You had to have materials like this in order to operate the ship and keep the passengers coming on board and create the image that helped them want to be passengers. So this stuff is really accessories to the ship itself, and they're inseparable. They're not just ephemeral or tangential to the ship. These objects are part of the ship. They're accessories, and that's something that makes them very significant in maritime history, not just in advertising history.
Awesome. I actually never even put it together that the ship probably wasn't like, it was, in all of the ads, it was always saying it's the fastest one, but it didn't actually go as fast as it did on its maiden voyage. It's such a interesting way to look at it. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions. Again, for those of you who are watching, if you have any questions that you want to put into the Q&A, it's right at the bottom. It says Q&A. You can type something in. But I have a couple of questions that I would love to pose to everyone, including myself. But I guess one of the first ones is, and this is both, you know, as the curator of the exhibition, but also just, I think it's a really great jumping off point. You know, what are some of your takeaways from the exhibition, from how it was put together, the narrative that was constructed, and also how, you know, how do we sort of think about that in the future of the Conservancy? So if anyone wants to jump in.
Can I jump back in since I'm already, I haven't cooled off yet? My takeaway from it was that it gave me an overview for the first time in quite some time about just how important these ships really were to not just the economy and but to the culture of the countries. In our country, the SS United States was what John Max Tone Graham, the great maritime historian, called ship of state. By the mid-20th century, every big maritime nation in Europe and our own was subsidizing in one way or another a flagship of the nation that would represent it abroad and would be an emblem of national prestige and accomplishment, artistically, engineering, and so on. The SSUS was our ship of state. And it is important to remember that every major maritime nation did this. And it's something that a lot of people today don't even remember, but these ads show you just how valuable a ship was to a nation in terms of its prestige and even its military preparedness. We built this ship with government money. Why? Because in World War II, all our soldiers had to go to England to go to a D-Day invasion on somebody else's boat. You know, that was like trying to bum a ride with your friend. We didn't have any ships that were capable of doing what the Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth could do, that were the Cunard liners. So that was part of the impetus for this. So it was a defense ship too. But more importantly, it was part of our national consciousness. Everybody knew what the SS United States was in those days. Even if they never traveled on it or never thought about traveling on it, everybody knew what it was. It was like the Capitol Dome, the New York skyline, the Golden Gate Bridge, Mount Rushmore. It was part of who we were as a country and what we could do. So these ads, especially the ads in the first section of the exhibition, really showed that. And other companies who contributed anything to the ship. I have in my collection a Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company ad. They ran a lot of ads in the 60s showing where their products went, skyscrapers and so on and so forth. They ran an ad of the SS United States leaving New York Harbor. And they had contributed the glass to the ship. And they were very proud of this. And they were not above boasting about it. So the ship really meant everything. It's even been pictured on foreign products. I've got in my collection a candy tin from Great Britain that they used that on the lid. They used a picture of the SS United States as well as their own Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth. So even in foreign countries, and the country that we stole the speed record of the North Atlantic from, they still put our boat on the cover of their products. So those just are little indications of what these ships really signified. They were ambassadors of our country to the world or to their host countries, whichever countries they were from. So that I think is very clearly came across in this show.
Speaking of the military purpose, the original building of the ship as the dual purpose, I just wanted to comment that really fits into the whole James Bond, the Avengers idea, because she was actually a secret agent, if you think about it, because she was ready and poised to be converted for military service at any time. So, but in terms of the overall takeaway for me, it was so much fun to read everything and look at the ads all in one place and just be reminded of what a triumphant accomplishment this ship was. And not just in its day, but how it still needs to resonate with us now. And it just reminded me why we've all been involved in this effort to save the ship.
my takeaway from the exhibit, which, by the way, Sydney, is marvelous, and I'm glad I got to thank you in person. The idea was great from the beginning, and you pulled it off marvelously. And my biggest takeaway, my love for machines, transportation, automobiles, planes, trains, automobiles, is that of all the machines that I find beautiful as in their engineering, but in their beauty, were all models. Like there's a Chevy Impala. They produced thousands of them. It had a look every year. Had a new look. Airplanes, same thing. The Boeing 747, a beautiful airplane, but they made hundreds and thousands. They made many of them for different airlines and different liveries. The ocean liners had one name, one ship, one name. Their personality was stuck to one particular mode of transportation. There was only one SS United States, only one France, and everyone knew it by its name. It wasn't a United States, it was the United States. And this really highlights her personality and the time in which she was a working girl from 1952 to 1969, and her life. She's still with us. We're filling everybody in where she's been and hopefully where she's going, but she's an identity. She's a star who was, the advertisements were about her at one point. She also helped sell other projects. People use the ship to make their products look better, as you pointed out. And she's her. Now she is like an individual, not just an ocean liner, not just a ship. She's the SS United States, which hopefully will be like an Empire State Building, Statue of Liberty, where you say the name, you put the name and the face together, and she's herself. She's an identity.
And I guess I'll just jump in briefly and just say two things. One is that one big takeaway for me is that we can do a digital exhibition. Which is so exciting because it's been so challenging for the Conservancy in that we have not been able to put our objects and items on public display because we don't yet have a museum space. So this is just incredibly liberating and exciting to realize that while we are working toward that goal, we can share what we have. And I'm really looking forward to others, and hopefully some on this webinar now, who have items in their own collections, their own ads that maybe weren't featured or were. In other words, this is a launch, this is a start. And so we're so eager to hear from all of our supporters and members, and just how they respond to it and what they have shared over the years themselves, and just so eager for that interaction. And then just one issue that I get such a kick out of with these advertisements is the complexity of the messaging. So one issue that on the one hand, a lot of the ads are touting like that good old down home American informality and kind of the Holiday Inn at sea, and it's unfussy, and that's Americans pragmatic and just casual. But then at the same time, these ads are also touting this luxe, fancified European. You think of some of the menu descriptions served in the dining room, like vegetables a la Hoover. Adding that a la, this sort of European gleam that was also kind of baked into how the ship was sold, which I find really fascinating. Just that toggling between the kind of America and this, but a sense that to really claim the luxury mantle, you had to invoke Europe. But anyway, I'll stop it. But yeah, thank you.
No, I think that was great. One of the, obviously as a trained art historian, I look at things really closely, and will find myself looking at one image for a couple of hours. So sometimes I feel like I'm really pulling things from it that maybe not everyone will see if they look at it for, even 10 minutes. But it is really cool because I think advertisements have this really interesting, they're like on the line between being what we consider fine art and then also this like very public facing constructed narrative. And so it's always fun to see how, you know, what people can pull from it, but also it's so relevant, right? Like just the idea of advertising itself is so relevant. And I think that it was a really good way to engage like the larger community. And we got some really great responses from people who just stumbled upon it. You know, obviously we have an amazing amount of people who have been following the SS United States for years, but it was really cool to start seeing some of those virtual guest book entries, which was a way for us to, like, you know, make you feel and make us feel like we're actually interacting with humans rather than just the internet. But it was very, very cool to see some people actually sending in messages being like, wow, I actually, you know, I never heard of this and this was really interesting, or I never thought of this in this way. And so I'm just very, it's been really great hearing how people have taken it. So I thank you all for that, for being, you know, engaging visitors. So we have a couple of questions, and I think our, you know, just engaging a larger community, this one sort of goes into that. So Maurice asked if, he said that Sydney started off mentioning that these advertisements could help stimulate more public interest in the SS United States. Have you floated, no pun intended, this idea outside of the Conservancy to gauge interest, or do you have plans to do so in the future? And I mean, I definitely think that that's the plan. I think, like Susan said, the digital exhibitions and the idea of them is so great, because not only does it give us the option of showing the world what we have, because the Conservancy has an amazing collection. It's robust, it's unbelievable, but it also is so accessible, right? You know, one of the issues that museums face is their accessibility, and whether that be literally because not everyone can take a trip across the country to go see an exhibition that they heard of, but also physically, you know, obviously there's a lot of narratives in museums that aren't made for exploring in the way that you want to. Sometimes it's a little bit like standoffish. And so I think this digital exhibitions are a great way for us to sort of like ping others in the world, whether they're interested in maritime history, whether they're interested in the SS United States, or just you know, visual culture in general. We have so many options and opportunities going for us. And I think if we continue this way, that it'll just sort of strengthen those potential collaborations. I don't know if anyone has any other sort of bits to talk about with collaborating in the future with other institutions. We've got a couple of questions here. I love the idea from Brian Abbott that says, has there been any discussion using an advertising campaign similar to what's been discussed today to generate new interest in the ship? I think that's fantastic. And also kind of what we were hoping with the museum shop is, you know, we're trying to get this image of the unrushables and these like really fun ideas out there. And in this very meta way, clothing is an advertisement in and of itself, right? You know, you have these fun images that you're wearing, but also they're tied to the Conservancy, they're tied to the ship, and things like that. And I also wanted to go back to something that Marc Shenfield said that, you know, I thought was really poignant. And I had actually, so my background has been on considering figureheads on 19th century ships and sort of how that played out with national narratives and identity. And you called the SS United States sort of like an ambassador to this country. And I think that's such a great way to put it, because in a way she was, you know, she did sort of, she got our people to where they needed to go. And while she was doing it, she did it in style and with speed. And I just wanted to touch on that because I really love the way that you said it. So I have a couple of other questions here. And this one, you know, I was gonna start off with it, but I wanted to hear your takeaways. But do you have any, other than the ones that you contributed to the exhibition, do you have any favorite pieces or parts of the exhibition that you had seen?
Do you mean anything that we have in our own collections that are not in the exhibit?
You can totally bring up that, but I was also thinking just like any particular pieces that were in the exhibition that that you thought were particularly poignant, or also very convincing. That's always an interesting thing that I am thinking through.
Well, I have one in my collection that is not in the exhibit. It was one it was a brochure, and these were common in the great days of the ocean liners. It was a cutaway view, like a dollhouse, cutaway of the entire ship. It was a cross section of the ship, and with all its intricacies and its layers of luxury, and then at the bottom were the engines and the fuel tanks and all the other things that made the ship work. And it was like a beehive of activity. And it's a fairly common brochure. You know, you can get copies online, I guess, through collectors and dealers. But the headline said, "Let's look inside the world's fastest ocean liner." And you opened it way up like this, you know, it was about this long. I don't know if you can see, it's about 1.5 feet long. And it was so emblematic of the age. It was America on its post-war roll, and we were the richest, most powerful country in the world, and everybody was looking forward, and you know, people wanted to travel. And let's not forget that for 6 years you couldn't go to Europe at all. We're complaining about not going for 1 year. They couldn't go for 6, even 7 years. I mean, the ocean liners didn't go back into civilian passenger service until 2 years after the end of the war. So, you know, there's a huge pent up demand. So this was all embodied in this brochure. It was like, wow, there's a whole new age, you know, and there's just something magical about that cutaway view, like so many other ships had that done too. And it was kind of like the most amazing creation ever in human history was the great passenger liners. They're up there with the cathedrals and the pyramids and the Great Wall. There's never been anything like that. So that's another piece that I have fondness for. And it was a piece of advertising in its own way.
I do know which piece you're talking about, that really fun cutaway. We've seen a lot of different, I think that's also a theme that we've seen in a lot of the advertisements, is this, you know, idea of like, here's a sample of what you can see, you know, like here's an idea of the ship that you can sort of take with you, and then to see the rest, you have to actually buy a ticket and do the crossing. But it's like, this really fun, you know, there's these like, one of the advertisements is called An Inside Story, and it shows like an illustration of the staterooms, and it's just like this very fun, like there's vignettes of all the different things you can do on the ship. And they're, you know, they're one of my favorites actually. And so I have also a question, I think this is more for Marc Perry though, is what do you think the role are of, so you obviously collected these travel posters, which are different than just regular advertisements that you would see in magazines. So what do you think the role of travel posters are in this narrative? And I would just love to get your take on sort of some of the differences and why you collected them.
Well, first of all, I mean, I think it's a slightly different audience because they're actually in a travel agency environment. So you want, you know, they would have these stunning models of the ships in their shop windows to attract your attention, to bring you inside. And then of course you've got these graphics that you cannot help but be drawn to these graphics. And so to me, it was all about continuing to sell the ship. And you know, I only have a few posters. I have some of the first posters that are all about the speed. And then I have these, and then I have a couple that are, you know, Sail in the Star-Spangled Banner. And it's really like, it's almost like a 60s fashion shoot aboard the ship, which is another thing that the ship was used for outside of just advertising. Vogue did more than one fashion shoot just using the ship as a stage. Walt Disney made a movie and, you know, filmed Bon Voyage, filmed partially aboard the ship while it was actually at sea. And it just, to me, it just helps cement the ship's role in pop culture. And as our national identity, as Marc was talking, Marc with a C was talking about earlier.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. I think the audience is such an important thing to think about, is who's actually seeing this. So we're almost at our time. Before we sort of hand it off to Susan for closing remarks, does anyone have any other last minute comments or questions that they had or anything they wanted to say?
I would like to say again, thank you for hosting this event. Thank you for having us. More than happy to contribute. And the exhibit and the things available in the shop are just really stunning. Very, very well done. So if I had a fedora, I would tip it to all who were involved.
Awesome, thank you. All right, Susan, I'll hand it back over to you, unless anyone has anything else to say.
I'm sure everyone has lots to say, but they know that our moderator will be very upset with us if we go over, so we'll be very well behaved. But yes, thank you all, and particularly Sydney, thank you for your extraordinary work on this project. And what's so wonderful about it is that it's still early days with this exhibition. We have other program content planned. There will be other panels in which we particularly, this kind of the family coming together to talk about this exhibition, people who already are deeply familiar with the SS United States, but future opportunities will really focus on broadening the aperture or aperture, I don't know how to say that, and looking at the SS United States and this advertising in the context of mid-century modern art and design, advertising in general, etc. So we're really excited about future program content. And in response to a question raised earlier about, gosh, could the Conservancy creatively utilize some of these advertising images and motifs in our own advertising for our efforts? We're actively exploring that, and particularly on social media, where so much advertising is now takes place. So yes, we are on it and excited about all of that. And also, just while I have the floor, I just want to put in a plug for another event coming up on June 23rd. We will be organizing our second virtual gala. That will be a fabulous online event, and there may be a few advertisements snuck in there as well. But anyway, my bottom line is just thank you all, everyone who is on this call, everyone who's had anything to do with this exhibition, but mostly our supporters. I mean, we just could not. The ship would not be afloat today were it not for your continued support. Yes, and I think Marc said earlier, the unrushable project, but it's nothing short of miraculous that she is still with us, and we are determined to take this all the way. And we just, again, thank you so much for all that you continue to do on behalf of the Conservancy, and spread the word and keep the flame alive. So again, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. We look forward to seeing you on future programming.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.